All right. Welcome, everyone. My name's Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist for Annie Bloom's books, and I'm admitting someone else. Thanks for joining us this evening. Thanks for taking the time out to do this. And hold on while I admit two more people. People are showing up. This is awesome. For those of you who don't know where Annie Bloom's books is, it's in Multnomah Village in Portland, Oregon. And we've been around for about 40 years, a little over 40 years, and we're still plugging along despite the craziness of the pandemic. Our store is currently closed to browsing, but there are staff at the store every day from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. to answer questions, email, phone. They would love to hear from people. They like talking about books. And so, yeah, get in touch with them. Our website is always open, day and night. So you can go over to www.annieblooms.com anytime and order up books like Scott Nadelson's book or any other book you want. We offer curbside pickup, delivery, and shipping options. So lots of convenient ways to get in there. So many people in the waiting room. This is awesome. Here we go. Welcome to all the new people who I'm admitting in right now. We got started a few minutes early. I'm just going through my little spiel here of where Annie Bloom's books is, and you can go to our website all the time and get books from there. And we've got some other events coming up in the near future. A week from today on Tuesday, October 27th, we're going to have David Beispiel and Vanessa Veselka reading together. That's going to be a great event. And a few days after that, on Friday the 30th, Lois Molina and Paul Ann Peterson together. And on Thursday, November 5th, we have Ashley Sweeney with local author Ellen Notbaum. That's 2 historical novels. They'll be reading and in conversation. And we are also, Annie Bloom's is thrilled to be partnering with Literary Arts for this year's Portland Book Festival. We're an official bookseller for the event, which will be online from November 5th to 21st. You can go to the Literary Arts webpage and register there and start signing up for various events. You can go to our website. On the homepage, there's a link from there to see which authors are on our stage. It's got a terrific lineup. So many really good things going on there this year, so check that out. Tonight, we are delighted to be hosting Scott Nadelson. Scott will be delivering books to the store this coming weekend, and they're available to order now. If you want a signed copy, please leave a comment to that effect in your order. And remember, you can always buy more than one copy. They make great gifts for the holidays. We do free gift wrapping. So after the reading portion of the event, there'll be a Q&A. We're going to do it both in the chat, and if you feel like it, you can pop on the screen and ask questions. So prepare your questions now. Think about how you want to do it. So Scott's new book is called One of Us. The stories in One of Us explore the tension between groups and individuals, the allure of tribalism, the claustrophobia of belonging, and the alienation that comes with separation. They range from autobiographical to historical and roam temporally and geographically, chronicling, among others, an encounter between the sculptor Louise Nevelson and the anti-Semitic French writer Louis-Ferdinand C. Sorry, something cut off there. A synagogue congregation facing ongoing public scandal, a comedy improv troupe trying to cross the threshold from an amateur to professional, and a young man navigating the competing poles of adventure and domestic bliss at the cusp of the new millennium. Admitting more people. So Scott Nadelson, he grew up in northern New Jersey before escaping to Oregon, where he's lived for the past 24 years. He has published 4 collections of short stories: The Fourth Corner of the World, named a Jewish Fiction Prize honor book by the Association of Jewish Libraries, Aftermath, The Cantor's Daughter, and Saving Stanley, the Brickman Stories, and a memoir, The Next Scott Nadelson, A Life in Progress. His novel Between You and Me was published by Engine Books in 2015. Scott's work has appeared in a variety of magazines and literary journals and has been cited as distinguished in both the Best American Short Stories and Best American Essays anthologies. Awesome. He teaches at Willamette University, where he is the Hallie Brown Ford Chair in Writing and in the Rainier Writing Workshop MFA program at Pacifica Lutheran University. Welcome, Scott Nadelson.
Thank you so much, Michael. Man, is it amazing to see all these names in front of me. There are people from pretty much every single stage of my life. So thank you all so much for being here. I really want to thank Annie Bloom's Books for hosting me. This has been a really hard year for so many people, and a hard year in particular for independent booksellers. And so I'm really incredibly grateful for bookstores that are still making it through and selling us books and keeping us going. And I hope you will support them. And again, thanks so much for coming out. I know everybody's got a lot of Zoom fatigue these days, and I appreciate seeing all your faces and names. So as Michael said, this new book, it's called One of Us, and I'll show you the cover. It's got a photograph from my own wonderful spouse, Alexandra Opie, on the cover. The stories in this collection are, as the title suggests, about groups and individuals and the tension between those, the way we decide that some people belong with us and others don't, who we decide is one of us and who is not. And I thought today I would read to you from the title story, which was one of the first stories I wrote in the collection, which I began very soon after the 2016 election. And as you might imagine, I was thinking about tribalism. I was also thinking about corruption and cruelty. So I think all of those things are part of what came out of my mindset at that moment. And I don't think I need to tell you anything else. Well, except that thinking about those things, my imagination pretty quickly went back to where it often goes, which is New Jersey in the 1980s. So this story is called One of Us. And I think I'll be able to read most of it to you. I'll skip a little bit in the middle. How's my sound, Michael? Am I good? All right, thanks. One of Us. We all expected Arlene Basunder to disappear for a while. She'd stop coming to sisterhood meetings, drop off the Purim Carnival Committee, skip the annual gala. She'd retreat, as any of us would have, until the noise died down. And if it didn't die down, if the issues couldn't be resolved, then she'd pack up the 6-bedroom colonial in Union Knoll, move to a town some miles away, join a new synagogue, a new sisterhood, a new Purim Carnival committee. What else could she do? Her husband, Glenn, had been indicted for defrauding the state of New Jersey. The story broke on the front page of the local paper. TV vans parked outside her house for 3 days. Faced with such exposure, how could she not want to hide herself away? Yet there she was at services at the end of the very same week, one of the first people in the sanctuary, flanked by her 2 teenage children, Todd and Naomi. It wasn't unusual to see just the 3 of them there on a Friday evening, as Basunder often traveled for work. They took their usual spot 4 rows from the front, just to the left of the center aisle, where the rabbi couldn't fail to see them over the top of the bima. Did she have no shame, no self-respect? Wasn't she embarrassed in the least? Of course, Basunder's arrest was embarrassing for everyone. After the news broke, none of us could say our pride in Temple Emek Shalom hadn't been shaken. He was on the board of directors, after all, one of the leaders of the congregation. Just inside the lobby doors, his name topped a list of major donors on a bronze plaque molded in the shape of stone tablets. He twice served as president of the men's club, and when he was in town for Shabbat, he was often called on to lift the Torah and carry it through the sanctuary so we could kiss it with our tzitzit or the edges of our sidurs. During the Kiddush afterward, we'd usually see him chatting with old Rabbi Aronson, who gazed on Basunder with a beneficent expression, suggesting gratitude and admiration. But then Rabbi Aronson offered most people that look. Grieving widows, boys whose voices cracked during Haftorah practice, parents who sought his counsel about a daughter's drug addiction. He was past 70, white-haired and beginning to stoop, and perhaps he was growing deaf. He'd also come of age during a more innocent time. Maybe he couldn't distinguish between a man of character and a charlatan. Could we? Why hadn't we suspected Basunder all along? True, we'd always recognized he was different from most of us. He wore his expensive suits as if they were overalls, yanking at the sleeves and then rolling his shoulders to set them straight, stripping off the jacket in the middle of meetings. He hadn't gone to Brandeis or Yale or RPI, not even to Montclair State, hadn't earned a degree in finance or medicine or engineering. Had he even graduated high school? We weren't sure. But he talked enough about his origins for us to know he'd grown up a virtual orphan in Elizabeth, his parents abandoning him and his sisters into the care of neglectful grandparents when he was a toddler. Not yet 15, he swept floors in a foundry specializing in manhole covers. I'm still just a lowly janitor, he'd say to Rabbi Aronson, loosening his silk tie, flashing a platinum Bulgari on his hairy wrist. Of course, he was no longer just a janitor. He'd built the biggest cleaning and maintenance company in the region, servicing office complexes and industrial parks all over Morris County and beyond. He had 70 people on his payroll, plus dozens of temps, and worked with all the major firms in the area, including those that employed many of us, Prudential, AT&T, Warner Lambert. Who didn't admire a self-made man? He was like our immigrant grandparents, scrappy and ingenious, lifting himself from bleak poverty to a level of wealth most of us, even some of the lawyers and doctors and investment bankers among us, could only imagine. So we'd accepted him into our ranks, voted him onto the board, shook the etrog and lulav in the enormous sukkah he built in his backyard. He played up his rough edges, talking brusquely, apologizing when profanity slipped into his speech. He alluded to unsavory characters in his past, to youthful brushes with the law. And we enjoyed his stories, pretended to cringe at the profanity, laughed when he gestured at the new stained glass window he'd paid for in the sanctuary, winked and said, "Good thing I settled all my debts or someone might come collect." We remained aware of our differences, but decided they mattered less than all we shared. And we waited eagerly every year for the end of the gala when we'd tear open his donation envelope and glimpse the figure on the check he'd slipped inside. What we might not have realized, or perhaps we didn't care, was that his biggest contract was with the state. His crews took care of government facilities from Trenton to Newark, repainting stairwells, repairing roofs, replacing ancient furnaces. Certainly, we knew he had close relationships with county freeholders, with state assemblymen, with the lieutenant governor who once accompanied him to our Passover potluck. But why should that have given us pause? Why would we think to question his motives, we who never bent the law beyond writing off a few charitable donations we hadn't made? One of those relationships must have gone sour, or else someone lost an election, because on a Tuesday morning in late fall of 1989, police cars greeted Basunder when he arrived at his office. According to the indictment summarized in both the Star Ledger and the Daily Record, the latter of which included a mugshot spread across 2 columns, he'd been overbilling the state for years. He'd charged for servicing buildings that had been abandoned for decades, others that had been demolished. A simple accounting error, his lawyer told the reporters, not a criminal conspiracy. In both articles, the lawyer hinted that the blame lay with a civil servant who oversaw the contracts. At first, we believed this story, or tried to, and hoped that the civil servant would step forward and accept responsibility. But when subsequent articles laid out the evidence against Basunder, our outrage quickly flared. He'd swindled us the same as he'd swindled everyone else. Hadn't the state taxes withheld from our paychecks helped finance his house and landscaping, and then that enormous sukkah in which we'd eaten Arlene's mediocre kreplach? We debated whether to print a statement in the monthly newsletter condemning Basunder's behavior. We considered taking down the plaque in the lobby. We suggested that Rabbi Aronson deliver a sermon on the dangers of avarice. But how could he, when Basunder's wife and children were right in front of him week after week, offering up their praise to Hashem like the rest of us? They too had been betrayed, or at least the children had been, though we couldn't help believing Arlene must have known what her husband was doing, must have given at least her silent consent. But if she felt betrayed, as said we did, or experienced the guilt of complicity, as many of us admitted experiencing only to our spouses in the privacy of our bedrooms, she didn't show it. During the silent Amidah, she stood longer than anyone else, swaying and mumbling, eyes closed, as the rest of us shifted uneasily in our seats. It was as if she were daring us to sully her husband's name in her presence, keeping us in check with her vigilance. She was an imposing woman, straight-backed and bosomy, with hair in a ballerina's bun that stretched the skin on her temples and showed off flashy earrings, big gold discs with gems dangling from their rims. She kept her gaze fixed on the rabbi through the service, never glancing around or behind, but still she somehow projected the appearance of keeping an eye out, cataloging our looks of disapproval. She knew exactly who was judging her, who was talking behind her back. And when all this blew over and we came to her for help with the carnival or the trunk sale, then we'd see what our judgments had earned us. The truth is, as much as we'd enjoyed Bisunder's company, envied his success, and benefited from his generosity, we'd never been able to stand Arlene. She was dour and assertive, quieter than most of us, but powerful in her silence. At sisterhood meetings, she'd sit stonily as we discussed possible speakers for a lecture series, uninterested, it seemed, or more likely out of her depth. But when we'd finally settled on a slate of scholars and writers, experts on Jewish women's history, on the design of Holocaust memorials, on the legacy of Emma Goldman, she'd heave a sigh, shake her head, and ask in a hushed voice that made us lean forward to hear, "Can't we bring someone who won't put us all to sleep?" Then she'd suggest a popular children's book author who also happened to be her cousin's friend. He'd already agreed to come, she informed us, and for half his ordinary fee. Every year, after we'd spent months planning, she'd take over the Purim Carnival the day we began setting up, arriving with bags of decorations and masks that terrified the little kids and balloons that filled the gym. She didn't listen to any suggestions, and when we challenged her, she'd remind us, without a hint of self-consciousness, how much money her family had contributed to the shul in the past year. We didn't know the history of the Basunders' marriage, or frankly, what Basunder had ever seen in Arlene. She wasn't attractive or charming, though she did have a pleasant singing voice. Had they met after he'd already started his business, or did their connection date from his time as a janitor? We wanted to believe the latter. Not only that she too had come from humble roots, but that she was an imposter in her role as benefactress and wealthy matron. We imagined her in the slums of Elizabeth, an aspiring showgirl maybe, or better yet, a streetwalker, before Basunder swept her away and set her in their ill-begotten castle atop Union Knoll. This was the way we made sense of her loyalty, even after he disgraced her and her family, and all of us, with his shady dealings, about which, after a few months, his lawyer refused to comment in public. We knew that this silence could mean only one thing. A plea bargain was in the works. Thank goodness, we thought. We'd soon be able to put all this behind us. Arlene could no longer deny in her mute, stoic way who her husband was, who she was, and where her money had come from. Yes, we'd lose their sizable donation, but we'd make up for it with our combined efforts. We could all give a little more, we told each other. We could stretch and sacrifice for the sake of the community. After all, hadn't most of us held back a bit, knowing Basunder would make up for our shortcomings? Most important, Arlene would finally stop coming to services, would finally stop making us pretend that nothing had happened. Surely she wouldn't show herself when her husband was a convicted felon, when he'd admitted his wrongdoing and accepted his fate. Surely she had too much dignity for that. Once again, the editors of the Daily Record printed the story on its front page. Basunder agreed to plead guilty to a single charge of conspiring to commit fraud in exchange for his testimony against the civil servant who'd taken a cut of profits from the servicing of buildings no longer in use. The evidence against him must have been damning, because even with the deal, the conviction carried a 13-month sentence at the minimum security camp at Fort Dix. The civil servant, on the other hand, went away for 7 years. The news generated a fresh bloom of embarrassment, as the article mentioned Basunder's involvement at Emek Shalom, even quoting our board president, who, when asked whether the synagogue would return any donations found to be tainted, said non-committally, "Mr. Basunder has been a very generous member of our community, but we do not condone any criminal activity and will cooperate with law enforcement." Even worse, the story began to spread among our children. During dinner, they'd pass on what they'd heard from other kids at Hebrew school, that Basunder had buried 2 mil in his backyard, bundles of crisp 20s, and that the spineless prosecutor was letting him keep it all. And we'd answer sharply, "What business is it of yours?" Then, softening slightly, we'd recite the old proverb about gossip. If you didn't see it with your eyes, don't witness with your mouth. The kids would try to argue on a technicality. They'd seen the newspaper, hadn't they? Didn't that count for anything? But we'd just raise a hand and stare sternly at our plates, signaling that they'd better not push their luck. Once more, we exchanged concerned phone calls and spoke privately to Rabbi Aronson. Should we release a statement? Should he deliver a sermon? For the sake of the children? Yes, yes, we all agreed, as soon as we knew for sure that Arlene and her kids wouldn't be back. We waited for Friday with a sense of giddy anticipation, ready finally to move on, to see ourselves once more as a community full of integrity and goodwill. We were so excited, in fact, that we finished our dinners quickly and arrived 20 minutes early. The sanctuary buzzed with our murmurs and lighthearted laughter as we took in the empty space in the fourth row. Rabbi Aronson stepped up to the bima, the cantor cleared his throat, and still we whispered and tittered. Then the doors flew open, and in walked those three besunders, Arlene marching straight down the center aisle, shoulders back, head held high, a wisp of lace pinned to the top of her tight bun, the two kids trailing behind. We were aghast, shocked mute, many of us forgetting to stand when the service started. Once again, Arlene stayed up longest during the silent prayers, sang the Adon Olam in her soft, tuneful, almost sultry voice, and afterward perused the snack tables in the ballroom, sidling up to the rabbi with a cup of punch in one hand and a pistachio pastry in the other, remarking on some detail from the week's Torah portion and complaining that there had been a few wilted petals in the flower arrangements on the dais. The florist should hear about it, she said. We shouldn't have to pay for next week's delivery. She accosted others too, the board president, members of Hadassah and the gala steering committee, any of us who hesitated for a moment to look her in the eye. She spoke to us haughtily, with contempt, defying us to send her away. And what could we do but smile and compliment her dress or her earrings and say that we looked forward to seeing what decorations she'd come up for this year's carnival? Only then did we really turn our attention to the younger besunders, whisper among ourselves how heartless it was to make them suffer any further humiliation. During services, they were hunched and miserable, Todd ducking down into his tallis, Naomi hiding behind her siddur. During the Amidah, they sat as soon as they could do so without calling attention to themselves, and they kept their heads lowered as their mother dipped and bobbed above them. They vanished as soon as the service let out, waiting in the car, we guessed, while their mother tormented us at the Kiddush. If she didn't go away for our sake, for the sake of the congregation, we muttered later in our bedrooms, changing out of suits and dresses and tucking jewelry and watches into cherrywood boxes and drawers, then at least she should consider the impact on our children. Couldn't someone suggest as much? I'm going to skip forward just a little bit here and take a sip of water. Thanks for sticking with me. Naomi Bisunder was a striking, though glum girl of 14, given to wearing baggy, unflattering clothes. If we didn't know better, we might have assumed she simply took after her mother, with her sour expressions, her bluntness. You're wasting your time, she told Rabbi Aronson when, after her bat mitzvah, he tried to convince her to enroll in high school Talmud study. Her sullen silences. We might have imagined her one day taking over sisterhood meetings and Purim carnival setups, undermining our daughters, just as Arlene had undermined us. But we understood that nothing could be further from Naomi's thoughts. She wouldn't take part in anything that made her the center of attention. Long before her father's arrest, she'd wanted only to be invisible. What most of us knew, or maybe all of us, was that an early bout of severe colitis had left her with a permanent shunt and colostomy bag, and she lived in a state of permanent apprehension lest her peers find out. As a result, she had as few friends as our awkward boys and kept mostly to herself. We'd always been careful never to tell our children what we knew, understanding how brutal and intolerant kids could be. And now, watching her sitting in the fourth row of the sanctuary while her mother davened in defiance, or was it some attempt at penance? Was Arlene actually trying to atone? And Naomi hid her face in her prayer book. We agonized on her behalf. She was the only one we truly pitied, the one who deserved better after all she'd already suffered. For Naomi's sake, we said to each other on the phone, one of us should tell Arlene to stay at home. And yet, in Naomi, we also glimpsed Arlene's only weakness. And recognizing it, we couldn't help wondering what might happen if we were to exploit it. We protected Arlene all this time, one of us said, as our indignation thickened. And this is how she shows her gratitude. And then, accidentally, or perhaps unconsciously, we let slip at dinner the source of Naomi's dreariness, and seeing the horror and delight on the faces of our children, made them promise to keep the secret. And because they were children, they did so for half a day at most. And then all the kids in the Hebrew school, all the kids in the high school Talmud study, and all those in Naomi's youth group knew. At services, they now pointed and giggled and whispered, and every so often we'd hear one of the younger ones, who didn't know any better, blurt out the phrase they'd all been passing around like pieces of discovered afikomen, plucked from its hiding spot and broken into equal portions. Shit sack. Or maybe it was one of the awkward boys who first said it out loud, one of those tired of being called butt plugger by Todd Basunder and his wrestler friends. And who could blame him? I can smell that shit sack from here, he'd say, 10 rows back, his voice raised just enough to make Arlene Basunder stiffen even more than usual, her chin rising an extra degree as old, oblivious Aronson asked us to stand for the Shema. Poor Naomi, we thought, with her pretty face hiding behind her dark hair, her damaged body pumping feces beneath the waistband of her baggy dress. Callous, selfish Arlene, we thought, keeping the kid on display, week after week, daughter of a criminal, pariah, through no fault of her own. Wouldn't she spare her now? And out of concern, one of us told our kids to be kind to Naomi, maybe even to seek her out after services one Friday evening. Show her some sympathy, we said, and perhaps suggested they wait for her at the synagogue's back door so they could catch her before she slipped out to the parking lot. Is it our fault that so few kids are capable of sympathy, especially when, like dogs, they smell fear and gather in packs? They did as we asked, a group of 10 or 12 crowding the door to the parking lot just as Naomi and Todd came down the back stairs. We don't know for sure what happened then. We were all up in the ballroom, sipping punch, snacking on fruit. We avoided the sweets as best we could, smiling our pained smiles at Arlene. We can guess, of course. One of our kids asked Todd about the money buried in the backyard, and another said, no, they probably hide it in their underwear. They've got it on them now. And then a third pointed to Naomi's pelvis and said, the shit sack, I saw it move. And when Todd wrestled him to the ground, the rest of the kids kicked and shouted, your mother's a whore, your father's a lying, just like him. It was as if all the words we'd thought but hadn't said for the past 8 months. Imagine 8 months of holding our tongues came exploding out of our children's mouths, an eruption of anger and cruelty and truth-telling. It's a wonder the doors didn't blow off their hinges, that the dome of the sanctuary didn't topple down. By the time we reached them, it was all over. Todd and Naomi had escaped into the parking lot, had locked themselves away in the Basunders' BMW. Arlene was the first down the stairs, and she cried out in a voice that even then was quieter than ours, that strained to make itself heard above our murmuring behind her. What did you do to them? What did you say? Our kids only shrugged. Several snickered. One boy wiped blood from his lip. Then, her face pale, veins showing on her taut temples, she turned to us. What did she expect? Our support? Solidarity? Compassion? Once more, we smiled at her, only now with wide, joyous grins. We couldn't help it. It was impossible to hide our pleasure. Her eyes went big with astonishment, it seemed, though afterward we assured each other that none of this could have possibly surprised her. This is how you treat one of your own, she said. You're no better than whom? We would never find out. Before finishing, she threw open the door and strode into the orange glow of the parking lot's overhead lamps. For a moment, we thought sparks were flying from her heels before realizing it was just light reflecting from bits of mica in the blacktop. And that was it. We showed up for services the following Friday remorseful, our kids reprimanded and ready to apologize. We knew it would be good for them to express their regrets, to learn to put on a sorrowful face. But the seats in the fourth row on the left side of the center aisle were empty. They stayed that way as Rabbi Aronson welcomed us. We were still braced when he reached the Kaddish, but by the time the Amidah began, we breathed easier. Such relief we'd never experienced before, not in a rush as we might have expected, but a slow seeping that spread outward from chest to limbs to digits. Later, some of us tried to describe the feeling, the unraveling of hundreds of tiny knots, steam rising from a field on the first sunny morning of spring. Our kids felt it too. We saw it in their flushed faces, their glances up at the dome overhead. There was plenty of time for them to learn to humble themselves, we thought, and if our lives were any prediction, they'd have no shortage of opportunity. So instead of giving them any more chiding looks, instead we squeezed their shoulders and offered up vigorous praise to Hashem, many of us standing and swaying for a good 15 minutes, losing ourselves in the ancient words, the sounds of them rich and glorious in our heads, while the room itself remained silent. And afterward, we all enjoyed brownies at the Kiddush, free of guilt and worry. My lights just went off. We didn't see Arlene again, or any of them. They sold the house and moved 10 miles west. Basunder served 5 of his 13 months and came back to open a successful real estate agency in Sussex County. The children transferred to Roxbury High, where Todd wrestled his way to the state championship for a 3rd time. How Naomi made out there, we didn't know, though one of our kids spotted her a year later at the Rockaway Mall, wearing dark eye makeup, torn tights, and combat boots. They joined Temple Beth El in Bud Lake, which soon had a refurbished ark and a Torah rescued from a Tehran shul ransacked during the revolution. We tried not to envy the exuberant Purim carnival there, to which, after it was written up in the New Jersey Jewish Herald, people flocked from all over the state. We resisted the impulse to contact their sisterhood president to find out whether Arlene was driving them all crazy. We told each other to enjoy thinking of her belonging somewhere else. Thank you all so much for listening.
Woo! That was great.
So I'm happy to chat, hang out with you all, many of you I haven't seen in so long. It's so good to see you.
All right, let's see. Got some hands clapping. Sorry, I'm looking for the unmute all button here.
Now is the time for the wine. I'll switch glasses here.
And feel free to post questions in the chat if you'd like, or to raise your hand, either an actual hand for a question or a little blue hand, and I can, there we have Sharon.
It's always the mother who's going to ask the first question.
Yeah.
I just have to say that it was fun hearing all those names of places that we used to live and knew, and that was brought back lots of memories. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we read in your book that you escaped to Oregon from New Jersey.
Right. It was not supposed to be for you. That was my secret bio. I don't know, somehow that happened.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. We enjoyed that, hon.
It was beautiful. Can I say that? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Victoria.
Oh, good. Okay. It's great to see you, hear you read. It's beautiful. But I have a question about the point of view. And I'm wondering if you, how you came to decide on first person plural, and if you tried it in the first person or another point of view before settling on that. Which makes me think of Faulkner, of course. Right.
Yeah, it's a great question. It didn't come right away. It definitely took a while to sort of find my way there. I resisted it for a while. I felt like, oh, it's gimmicky. I don't really want to do the Virgin Suicides, and Rose for Emily. You can't really do it better than that. And I tried to write that story a number of times from the perspective. So where that story started for me, there was a kid I went to high school with whose parents got arrested for defrauding the state in a different way than this character. And I tried to write that story for years from the perspective of somebody like me who was a friend or, so a bystander. I tried to write it from the perspective of the kids who were affected by it. And I even tried to write it from the perspective of the criminal. And eventually kind of stumbled onto that first line of just sort of seeing them, this community view of what this looks like. And then it immediately changed what the story became about, as the way that that the community is complicit in what's happened, the way they refuse their complicity. And that became the real story for me, which was far more interesting than anything I had tried from another perspective. So the perspective really led me to what the story was, but it took a while to find it. Thanks, Vicki.
Really nice, yeah.
We've got a couple of similar questions here in the chat from April Overstreet. Can you give us a sense of how you keep the creative energy flowing given the demands of teaching, family, and life in general? And then someone else wants to know, you teach, have department chair duties, and have a family. When do you find time to write? So those kinds of things.
Yeah, those are my colleagues there. I mean, for me, it's obsession, right? It's it's the thing I love to do. It's the thing that makes me feel most myself, and it's really become, I think writing for me has become, as much just a meditation practice, or exercise. It's something that I need daily, or as close to daily as I can get. And if I'm not doing it, I don't feel right. So I'm obsessive about carving out a little bit of time every day. And I have to do a lot of, I'm glad none of my current students are here. I see some former students. You shouldn't know this, but I have to tell myself a lot. It's okay to let other things slide. It's okay to do, a halfway job on other things. And I try to do that mostly with the administrative side of things and not the classroom side, but there's too much to balance. So I prioritize this over other things that I sometimes ought to.
Do you have a set time that you do it every day, or is it just whenever you can squeeze it in?
Mornings are best for me. So, I usually set my classes for afternoons, and I, try and fit in, get my daughter ready and off to school and drop her off, and I zip back home and try and get in as, sometimes it's as little as 15 minutes. And if I'm lucky, I can pull off an hour and a half before I have to turn my attention to other things. But 5 days a week is what I try.
Mona Cook made a good observation over here in the chat. I thought, she says, I was reminded of The Lottery by Shirley Jackson and the subtle horror that can lay under civilized society.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that story while I was writing this one. And that one, I've thought a lot about that story in the last 4 years. And that communal rage and communal revenge, and the way that a community can get swept up in the feeling of lashing out and taking relief in that violence. I think I hadn't been conscious of thinking about that, but I'm sure that was an undertone, and I know that story really well, so I'm sure it was present. Great question. Thanks, Mona.
Scott, can I ask about the final line? I just love that line. Was that something that came to you in revision? Was it a first draft line? Did you have it before you started writing it?
And
It's a great question.
And will you please read it again before you comment?
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. We told each other to enjoy thinking of her belonging somewhere else. Katie, I wish I could remember exactly when that came in. I don't think, I definitely didn't have it in mind at the start. At some point in the, in that voice, that communal voice that took over, the whole story is about belonging, and I was certainly thinking about belonging, but then there's also that longing in it, that they've lost her and that they've had to let her go, and that they're talking themselves into being okay with the fact that she's no longer one of them, so they can no longer torture her the way that and be tortured by her. I don't know when it came in, but when I got there, I knew that, oh, that was it. That was right. That was the story. So whether it was in an early draft or a later one, I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We have a question in the chat from Jessica Meza Torres. Hi, Professor Nadelson. I love the pace and rhythm of your writing. Where does that come from / do you think about it at all?
Pace and rhythm.
Is that him?
It's probably the thing that I work on the most in revision. I don't think about it so much when I first write a draft, but I've described this. I'm probably described it in a class to you at some point. I sort of talk about my process a bit. When I write a first draft, I try to write it as quickly as I can until I get stuck, and then I go back to the beginning and I start again, sort of a running start until I get. Eventually, I'm a sprinter, so I try to sprint to the end. And my early drafts are pretty sketchy. And then I don't actually read those first drafts. I print them out and I have them next to me, and I pull up a new document and I start writing again with that as sort of a blueprint. And then each draft along the way, I'm working on my pacing and language and rhythm and sound. And then in later drafts, I read it out loud to myself really quite obsessively. My spouse can tell you that when she's at home, I get to a certain stage and she knows it because she'll hear me mumbling in my office when she's walking by outside the door. And that's the way I would test out that pacing and that rhythm. I don't feel like it's something that comes naturally to me, so I really have to work hard at it. And that's part of the fun labor that comes in the later drafts.
Cool. Other questions?
Hey, cousin Mike, good to see you. Man.
Hey Scott, I've got a question that I don't know how to ask exactly. So forgive my ignorance of this type of religious community, but for me, I grew up in a church community, and what was so interesting about the story is that my expectation, my desire for this epiphany moment is the church or the religious community realizes, okay, the institution of justice is not here. Like, we're here for healing, for forgiveness. And of course that doesn't come. And the way that you had that desire for justice come out in that horrible act of the children attacking was brilliant. And so I guess I don't even know how to ask my question, but how much were you thinking about what the purpose of this religious community is? Like, why do people go there besides the social aspect? And how are you subverting that in the way that you wrote the climax of the story?
That's a great question, Van. And I mean, I guess part of it is my experience of religious community was largely as a kind of social organization that was like most of the social organizations I've been involved in my life or seen. It's about politics, and it's about maneuvering, and it's about posturing. And I never really felt that sense of and this is partly me. I don't necessarily blame the community, although I think there were certain things about it that were sort of built in, partly because of the time and the place and class. All of those things sort of combined to make an environment that never felt healing to me. And I mean, partly maybe it's just growing up and being, junior high, and there's sort of that all that sense of I don't know, power dynamics. That was what was present for me more than anything else. And so I probably didn't think about it beyond that. Sort of conscious that for individuals, it could fill a different need. And there was a moment in my late teenagehood where I was drawn to spiritual experience through a Jewish community, but it was already kind of after I had left that community. So I think from the start, I just saw it as a community that was a political entity rather than a spiritual one. And maybe that's sad.
Yeah, but that like that there's that moment where you're that glimmer of hope when they see Louise sees the children hurting, and you think, okay, well something good is going to come of this. They realize that there's all this pressure on them, but then what has been brewing this entire time is not an embrace of, you belong here, come with us. It's of course the exact opposite, and that's what made it so heartbreaking. Really well done. It's a fantastic story. Thanks.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Scott, my name is Gabrielle, and I really, really loved your story too. There was one line in there that really, really struck me as a metaphor for how I like to look at community. And you said we remained aware of our differences, but decided they mattered less than we all shared. And for me, that is so inspirational as a guideline, a pragmatic guideline for any community, including family, schools, employing, jobs, and especially in this current climate. So I just really love that line and wanted to thank you for just so many inspirational thoughts that also reminded me that the action of one person like Basunda, it has what a ripple effect it has on an entire community, and that it also changes in an instant our perceived perspective of that person, that family, and everything we believed before. So thank you very much. It's a great story.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Yeah, that makes, I mean, what you said about the one individual, how little I even realized that 4 years ago when I wrote this story, and we're reeling from the ripple effects one individual can have. Absolutely.
Gabrielle, Katie wants you to write that line down in the chat if you are able. And Scott Mona Cook, speaking of what you were just speaking of, will you reflect on the issue of class and the way that the man bought his way into an educated and affluent community? He never really did belong, right? It reminds me of the way Trump bought his political capital and uses it to gain power and favor, but I think he will have a similar experience of being shut out of the Republican Party after his money is gone.
Yeah, I was certainly, I wasn't trying to write about Trump in this story, but it was inevitable that presence. It's, the combination of its wealth, its masculinity, its aggression, and just the way that asserts itself, and the way that people will respond to those things, even when they recognize that it's damaging. And it's a really seductive, I mean, it's scary how seductive those aspects of power can be, and how we're trained to respond to them. And I think, in the 1980s in New Jersey, especially felt like a very, looking back on it, now it feels like a very toxically male place and time. And the kind of music, that was popular then, with the big, hair bands, and we watched a lot of professional wrestling. It was all this sort of over the top maleness and roughness, and that we sort of would embrace, and somebody would, somebody coming from seemingly rough circumstances, they would, if they could work in their way into a community that was very different, I think they would be quickly embraced in that. And I think it's the combination of money and flash and assertiveness, confidence. And I guess it's not that different still.
Yeah.
Other folks with questions? Go to the second page, make sure no one has a hand raised there. All right.
Hey, Scott, are you in your office right now? Is that why the lights went out? Because I know I have like automatic lights at my office at work.
I'm in my Alexandra's office, and she set me up with these great lights, but I think they're battery powered, and I think they lost their powers.
Nice.
So now, a little extra mood lighting for the end here.
It's dramatic. Well, if we don't have any other questions, I'm gonna pop in this URL where you can head on over and purchase Scott's book into the chat here. That's the event page. The book is available there. As I said before the event got started, Scott's gonna be bringing up books this weekend, and you can request a personalized signature on those, make it extra special.
Pull out my really good handwriting for you all.
Yeah, show it off. Thanks everyone so much. Thank you, Scott. It was a great event. Wonderful to see all of you here, and we hope to see you at another event in the near future. This event's getting recorded. We'll put it up on our YouTube site probably sometime tomorrow afternoon, so you can go and watch it again or point other people toward it who missed it. All right, thanks everyone. Have a really good night.
Thank you all so much for being here. Really so great to see you. I really appreciate it. Jamie.
Thanks, Scott. Looking good.
Yeah.
Wayne. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good.